Our center can read the game, can play like a point guard. Young days, he just rebounds, one pass, and he finishes on the other side. It's pretty impressive.
We had some scouts who were very into drafting the Europeans, like Sabonis. I'd seen film on Sabonis forever. I mean, he was an unbelievable player.
Sabonis. You know, I played against Sabonis basically since I was 16. I told everyone all the time that if Sabonis was in the NBA, he'd be the best player possibly ever. And guys always said, come on. I said, he'd be the best center in the league by far.
Oh, Sabonis again! Brilliant play!
Sabonis? Oh, man.
Look at the pass. Look at the pass by the big guy.
What I loved about him is he always put a little flair on his passes. It wasn't just a simple pass. It was a hook around pass.
Hooks it to Smith and he lays it in!
And then he give you the wink like, told you, I can get it done.
Sabonis, he was the guy that everyone said, I wish we could have seen him play in the NBA when he was the height of his career.
Shot comes out to play him. Sabonis goes around him for the slam. Holy Lithuania!
There were a bunch of European players that had an impact on European young kids, and Sabonis is definitely up there with the best of them.
I don't know if there's another player in the history of the game that can do what he did.
Sabonis, the big boy from Lithuania.
He's simply one of the best to ever put on a basketball uniform.
Man, such a fun OG to watch. I've always said that if he would have played his prime in the NBA, I mean, we caught him at the tail end. You played against him in '99. What can you say about one of the most skilled big men that we've ever seen in the NBA?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree. I think we didn't see him in his prime, but what we saw was still something pretty special. He didn't have the mobility that he had in his youth, but his passing, his shooting, he was like a point guard at the center position. And you look at players who followed him, people like Divac and Jokic now, who's an all-star. He was that first guy to kind of play that way. We just didn't get a chance to see him here in the NBA at that level. I do remember, though, in '88 when he played for Soviet Union and they beat the USA in the Olympics. And his mobility, his athleticism, David Robinson head-to-head against him, future Hall of Famer, and he was just as athletic as David Robinson. And the skill to complement that. So what a special talent, one of a kind, and really helped sort of revolutionize the big man position now, where you see big shooting threes, bringing the ball up, making great passes, and really having an offense run through them.
Well, he suffered an Achilles injury early on in his career.
Right.
He was actually, in fact, drafted in 1985 by the Atlanta Hawks, and it was nulled.
Wait, I didn't know that.
Yes, because it was nulled because he was under 21 at the time. But I always say how much he could have changed the landscape of the NBA. Just his addition, even with Atlanta at that time, or even in his addition in his prime with Portland. I mean, we saw him when he was, bigger and slower, but he still was able to run that offensive game. We have a teammate here, Grant Hill. We have a teammate here, Isaiah Thomas, that played for NBA championships. What would that matchup have looked like with a Clyde Drexler and an Arvydas Sabonis against the bad boys?
The bad boys.
Detroit.
I mean, I'm an unofficial bad boy cousin.
Okay.
And I think those Piston teams were great. It would have been interesting. I think the Pistons were destined to win that year with that special group. But with Clyde and that talent out there in the early 90s, late 80s, forget about the bad boys. You start thinking about the Lakers. Like, would they been able to get out? I mean, it would have changed things. And even if you go back even further, and one of our other teammates here at NBA TV, Kevin McHale, as great as those Boston Celtic teams were, you think of Dominique and Kevin Willis and a young Sabonis, it would have been interesting. I'm not saying they would have beat the Celtics, but he was that kind of impactful player. And had, if you insert him into those teams that were already playoff teams, already teams that felt like they were contenders, history could have been different.
Very impressive right there. Now, B. Shaw, 1988, you're on the same court with David Robinson, Kenny Smith, Muggsy Bogues, an array of other players that eventually went on to play in the NBA. You're going against Arvydas Sabonis. You're witnessing him play. What were your thoughts going back then?
When I was on the U.S. team, it was '86 before the Olympic Games, the World Championships. But as Grant talked about, every bit as athletic as David Robinson. I remember him catching a couple of dunks over the back, tip dunks over the back of David Robinson in competition. But this guy was incredible for the Soviet Union. The Atlanta Hawks actually had their scouting department was really ahead of the game because they had a connection with the Soviet Union. They had another guy, Alexander Volkov, who was on that team, who I think the Hawks drafted as well. But what Sabonis would have done if he would have been here in his prime is he would have sped up the evolution of what the three-point game is right now, especially in terms of bigs stepping out and being able to shoot out there, because what it would have done, he obviously had the ability to still be able to drive to the basket and be a playmaker if he was hit with a pocket pass, much like we see Draymond Green doing for the Warriors. But he would have been able to pick and pop and stay out there around the three-point line and facilitate out there. And at that time, when centers were and the biggest guys on the team were playing inside with their back to the basket, it would have forced them to have to come out where they were uncomfortable and defend out there on the perimeter. And that's something that he did. And it's unfortunate that we didn't get to see him in his prime because he was really, really good and doing things that at that time weren't seen by a big man in this league.
I think that it also would have sped up the amount of Europeans you felt that could play in the league, because you talked about Alexander Volkov. He couldn't play. I mean, he didn't fit in.
Right.
Game was just different, much more rugged. A lot of those guys would come, man, they would last a year or two and be like, I'm out of here. They would go back to Europe. He had the size, the skill, the strength, and everything to be able to play. And I think that the evolution that you see now would have started up a little bit earlier. I think a lot of people would have said, man, Sabonis opened the door for a lot of players. I saw him playing as a young player, as a junior on the Russian team, and it was the early '80s. We were over where I was with the NBA, traveling in the summer, doing clinics and stuff over there, and they happened to be playing. And John Drew came downstairs, and he was from the Atlanta Hawks, and he said, "You gotta go see this young guy, like unbelievable." So I walked upstairs, and man, he was throwing underhanded bowling ball passes, length of the floor, running. I was like, wow, that guy's good. They said he's like, I don't know, they told me his age. I was like, how do you know how old he is? That guy looks like he's like 30, and he's playing on the junior team. But no, he was really special, and the league did not see him in his prime, anywhere near his prime.
I think about Arvydas. I think about Oscar Schmidt, guys that were international ballers. I wish they could have came over here. But now, to my untrained eye, of course, I don't have nearly the experience neither of you two gentlemen have, but looking at Arvydas Sabonis, I see a player like Nicola Jokic. I see someone who has similar games. Am I on the right path, or is there any player in the NBA that you could compare him to what he was able to do back in the day in his prime?
You know, he passed and moved a little bit more like Bill Walton as opposed to Jokic. I think he's a little. Bill was a hell of an athlete before Bill got hurt too. He was a little better athlete, I think, than Jokic is. You know, in his prime and able to play. But they both passed in there. You know, a lot of the passes as guys would drive. Like I played with Bill. You'd make a cut and you think you'd be completely out of his vision, and Bill would throw the ball really late and hit you, and you'd be like, dang, man. I mean, he had the ability, and so did Sabonis, to make a lot of those late. Jokic makes beautiful passes too. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, along that line, you know, just a great passing big guy with a great feel. And I always love to see big guys with a great feel, because I say to them, he would have played if he was 6'7" too. He'd have played if he was 6'4". It would have been, those guys. He didn't play because of his size alone. He played because he was really skilled. And that's the same thing with Jokic. Jokic is really skilled. He plays on his skill, not his size. He just happens to be huge, which helps him. But there's very few guys that have played that style and had the vision of those guys we're talking about now. A unique, very small group of guys could see like that in the post.
A very unique athlete indeed, a unique ball player, but now we play it forward. Now his son's in the NBA. Domantas Sabonis playing for the Pacers. Every once in a while you see a flash that reminds you of his dad. When you watch him play this season, what are your thoughts on his play? Can he be an all-star?
I think this year in the East, I think he will be an all-star. He's put together a great season so far. You see what he's averaging, points, rebounds on the season. He's very efficient, shooting 50% from the floor. He's extended his range. You know, he can knock down shots. He doesn't shoot a lot of threes, but has the ability to knock down shots from the three. And he had the advantage of obviously growing up, seeing his father play. I actually had a short stint on the Portland Trail Blazers in 1999 was a teammate of his. So I had actually seen him, like I said, in '86, and then in '99 on that Blazers team, where obviously he had slowed down a lot, but his skill set, I think that's the best compliment that Kevin could have given him in terms of he wasn't a great player just because of his size. If he was 6'5", I agree with you. If he was 6'6", because of his skill set, his basketball IQ, he still would have been able to be an effective player. And when you look at, and we talked about Volkov, who didn't really make it over here, but Marshallonis was part of that Soviet Union team. We in 1988 went over and played in the McDonald's Open I think it was in Madrid.
Yeah.
And we got to play against the Yugoslavian team, which had Vlade Divac, Toni Kukoc, Dino Raja, Stojko Vrankovic, Drazen Petrovic, all of these guys that were on that team. And Sabonis, and those guys on that Yugoslavian team, you got to see those guys come over and really make an impact, in